Hey everybody, it's Andy aka Max Writer. We are back with another author showcase. This is my 7th Call of Cthulhu scenario. Now, I'd already done this video once. I did it actually last week, but because I thought I was completely done with the scenario, printed it out, did the author showcase, and actually set it up to go online. But then the night before that I released this, which was March 1st, I suddenly realized there were a couple things I needed to add that I had left out inadvertently. So that's the reason why the holes are already punched. So I apologize for that. Normally I have these without the hole punches and they just flip right over. But without further ado, here is Nightmare in the Moonlight. Now this is an adaptation of J. Chapman Miske and H.P. Lovecraft's The Thing in the Moonlight, this is the entire story, which was the bulk of this was an H.P. Lovecraft letter that he wrote back in, I think, 1927. Yeah, 1927. And then in the 40s, Miske added a couple of framing bits to make a framing story for it, to make it even creepier. So it's public domain, and I love taking stuff and seeing what I can do with it. So here's Nightmare in the Moonlight. Of course, we got our frontispiece, our cover page, whatever you want to call it. Here's a little dedication to H.P. Lovecraft. Here's what I've already published. My playtesters, special thanks to them. We had a good time. We played this back in 2016 as part of a regular campaign, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I think they had a good time too. One of the most interesting things that ever happened in my game, an impale with both barrels of an elephant gun. It was fun. So we've got our table of contents, and then the foreword actually talks about just what I told you, the story, how it came about, that kind of thing. Nightmare in the Moonlight starts actually on page 7 with our introduction. We've got our keeper's background on what's happening. It's relatively short because this is a kind of a simple storyline. Our player's information on how to get them involved, and then adapting the scenario has some ideas for making it into a modern day scenario. This could actually even be, the basic premise could be placed in a Dark Ages, Cthulhu Invictus, Down Darker Trail scenario very easily. So then we go into a modest gazetteer of Providence. I found a large public domain map online of Providence, very, very detailed. So I decided that I would say as much as I could about Providence, and this ended up becoming, we're starting on page 9, and it ended up turning into quite a bit, like 24 pages of information on Providence. So here's some of the basics: who's the mayor, who's the police chief, a couple other things. Then we've got a brief history of Providence with your background and how Providence came to be as a town. I go into neighborhoods, and actually several pages here I gives just a little information on each neighborhood. So if your characters are from Providence, they might say, I'm from Valley neighborhood, and here, I know what kind of a person, mostly what kind of people live there. The police district houses cover half of a page and a little bit more. And then I went into original noted map locations. So this map, in addition to having 15 numbered locations, also had a lot of just spots where it was like, hey, this is here, and it was just written directly on the map. And after realizing that some of these were quite interesting, I decided to incorporate them all into this. So we've got several, like Butler Hospital isn't listed man, I can't talk. Butler Hospital isn't numbered, but it is mentioned on the map, so I wanted to talk about it. Obviously, it's very important. Dexter Asylum, the First Baptist Church. And so we've got a lot of different locations in Providence that are on that map. I've also included a high resolution of that map with the product separate of it, so you can do whatever you want with that. It is a public domain map. It's made back in 1904, so well before, so the copyrights are well run out. Now, the original map locations, there were 15 of those, and so we went into detail with those as well. The fire department, some churches, one of the high schools, the Narragansett Hotel. In this case, the Providence Biltmore had not been built yet in 1904, so that wasn't on the map at all, so I had to add it. Some churches, various other things. Now, unmarked locations of possible interest are a few things from some of Lovecraft's stories or other people's stories that are mythos related and set in Providence, or just of interest, I thought. So we got the Church of the Holy Ghost. That's from what is that from? The Haunter of the Dark. The Fleur-de-Lis building from the Call of Cthulhu. Free Will's Church. That's also from Haunter of the Dark. There's a picture of it. Where H.P. Lovecraft lived. Joseph Kerwin's house, I tracked that down. That was fun. That was a lot of work. Providence Athenaeum. Of course, we got Providence Biltmore, the Journal, Rhode Island Historical Society, Shepley Library, which is a little-known private library that was actually open to the public back then. The Shunned House. That's one of my favorite stories. It scares the crap out of me. And the Charles Dexter Ward House. Of course, Charles Dexter Ward, that story completely took place in Providence. We'll talk about that again in a moment. There are 5 scenario locations that are specific to the scenario. Those are lettered instead of numbered. And so you've got a little bit of information on those, plus reference to where you can find more information. There are several municipalities that butt right up against Providence, so I wanted to talk about them. And I also wanted to talk about Pawtuxet because it was kind of important in some of the stories. I've got a section on mythos stories set in Providence. 2 pages, actually. Call of Cthulhu, the case of Charles Dexter Ward, that's probably the most important one. From Beyond, The Shunned House, Dark Brotherhood. So these are Lovecraft, then Dark Brotherhood, The Shadow from the Steeple, Shambler from the Stars, and The Survivor, all either written by Lovecraft and somebody else, usually Derleth or Robert Bloch. These are the only ones I could really find that took place in Providence in the 1920s. I have a short list of Call of Cthulhu scenarios set in Providence because there aren't many, with some details on some information on how some of the products that were put out from Chaosium years ago had some places that seemed off on the map, and I double checked that. We've got a brief timeline of Lovecraft's homes, where he lived and when, from age 3 up to his death. The case of Charles Dexter Ward it takes place entirely in Providence, just about, and Pawtuxet. So it's important, and I thought it was important to talk about Joseph Kerwin, who was a powerful wizard who lived in Providence back in the 18th century, as well as Charles Dexter Ward. And this actually blew up and got a lot bigger than I was really planning on it being. But it's one of my favorite books of Lovecraft. It's my favorite book that Lovecraft ever wrote. It's one of my favorites of all of his stuff. It's just really well done, in my opinion. We've got a picture of Captain Abraham Whipple here, Charles Dexter Ward himself. We go into his life starting here and what eventually happens to him. And then there's a timeline as well. There are Joseph Kerwin timelines online, but there is no just Charles Dexter Ward timeline anywhere that I could find, so I thought it would be nice. And we've got a really nice picture of the portrait. The Nightmare Begins, the actual scenario Nightmare in the Moonlight, starts on page 33. So from page 9 to page... Yeah, from page 9 to 32 is your... essentially is about Providence. So basically, you get asked by a psychologist to give you some help. I've noticed that people would like to see the handouts printed out just in case they have trouble with some of the fonts. So I printed out the entire handout here. You have the option of going to Dexter Asylum if you want to deal with the people deal with the person in the story who gives you the information, but you don't have to. Your eventual destination has to be 66 College Street. I added a downstairs. 66 College Street is broken into 2 flats. Lovecraft lived in the upstairs, actually. And the downstairs flat was inhabited after the storyline takes place by somebody else. So I had to make up somebody who lived downstairs. The upstairs flat's where all the action is. There's another handout that's printed out to make it easier for people to read if they need that. In part 2, you leave the house and you go into town to search for something to help this guy who's in trouble. And you eventually will hopefully end up in Curios. I've got a little sidebar here about Chinatowns in Providence, because there were some at one point until they were run out, essentially. And there are some options for getting what you need. There are actually 3 different options of getting it just legally, getting somebody who works there to help you, or getting help from some people across the street. So there's a lot of ways that the scenario can actually go depending upon what the characters decide to do, or what the players decide to do. The eventual intention is to actually go after Howard Phillips in his dream, and you can get some help here. Part 3 actually deals with going into the dream. So you're not entering the dreamlands the normal way. You're not just like, "Ooh, we're going in." You have to deal with going in a slightly different way. This discusses what the dream is actually like a little bit, how it feels when they get there, when the players get there. Here's Howard Phillips. Hopefully you can find him. Probably can. And then the things in the Moonlight. Now, these are creatures that have never appeared in Call of Cthulhu, as far as I know, before. They might have, but I don't know. And finally, the escape. and the chase. There's a way to escape this thing and survive, but it's not going to be terribly easy. Of course, it's not always completely easy when you've got somebody who is actually upset that you're leaving. But he's not probably going to stop you. He'll come back for you later. There's a little bit of information on the aftermath, what happens if people mouth off to this guy, and a denouement, or an idea of what happens to the players afterwards. This can be run as a convention game if you want, although you're going to have to really trim down the role play because there's a lot here. There are ways for the keeper to easily just get to the next section so that they can continue playing. But the denouement is for if you're playing it as a one-shot. In any case, this could easily fit into to a campaign as long as you are in the late 1920s. Sanity rewards, and then afterwards playtest notes where I talk about how my game went. And this was a lot of fun, and I've actually got some good feedback on that. And to be quite honest, I put this in because I really like when I'm reading a scenario or something, and they'll have a sidebar that says playtest notes, and hey, this happened in ours. I always thought those were kind of fun. There is quite an extensive bibliography. I did a lot of research on Providence and on some of these stories. I discuss the house on College Street in more detail, who lived there when, and then we've got our non-player characters. There are 10 NPCs here, plus we've got the things, average thing in the Moonlight. If you don't feel like rolling them up, boom, you've got some. And some bonus non-player characters in the form of Joseph Kerwin and Charles Dexter Ward. This is one of the things that I added, that I thought about I should add. The thought came to me, if I had this product, I want some stats for these guys. I mean, they're discussed over 4 pages. I want some stats for these guys. So I put some stats together, but that threw out the entire page count, so then I had to rethink a few things. Here is a monster sheet for the thing in the Moonlight, and then we're on to our Providence maps. Now this map, the first map has everything. It's got the scenarios, locations, and it's got all the other locations that are listed in here, marked on the map. As you can see, downtown gets a little crowded, but we do remedy that situation. Now this map just has all the Providence locations, so that your players can actually be given this map if they're from Providence, and can be given part of the key, and they might know where stuff is. And then here's a blank map. This essentially, except much larger, is the free map that I'm giving away with the product. I did some close-ups because downtown is so crowded. So as you can see, the first one shows the scenario locations as well as all the Providence locations that appear in this section. This one, like the second map above, shows just the Providence location, so this is another one you can hand over to your players. And finally, this guy just shows the base downtown. Here's just from the map. We've got our key, and then we're into some other maps. Here's a close-up of College Street, where number 66 is very clearly marked. It might not be super easy to find, but with the description in the text, you should be able to find it. I didn't want to mark it because this is another map that you can hand to your players and be like, boom, you're on College Street, where you go? Here's the map of the house as best I could do. As you can see, this is the first floor, the second floor. The first floor I had to make up all on my own, but the second floor, Lovecraft drew some maps in some of his letters, so I was able to pull from them and try to make at least a decent looking second floor. Now his maps weren't 100% clear, so I had to make a few guesses. And then you've got blank maps. You want to take these, put them on Roll20 or something, then you can have your character icons move throughout them however you want. The dream map is fairly simple. There wasn't much to it. It's a dream. I put a little trolley map in, and to be quite honest, when I ran this, I played it on a tabletop, and I printed the trolley out so that 1 inch was 5 feet. And I don't remember if this was the right size or if it was bigger, so that we could put our minis actually on the trolley. There are 2 pages of handouts. There's the Morgan's note, or what Morgan wrote, I guess. And then there is a letter that the characters find, as well as a business card for one of the NPCs. I've got NPC Pictures. You can print these out and cut them out, hand them out to your players. We've got our pre-generated investigator pictures. And then I've got this was another thing that I ended up adding in order to balance out the book, because I wanted my investigators to start on an odd page, so it's straight up back and forth. You can print these investigators out and straight up hand them out to your players if you're playing at the tabletop. But the pre-generated investigators in brief gives just a simple little bit of information, so your players could look at this, pick which one of the pre-gens they want to use, and just go from there. And we've got pre-generator investigators of a union activist, a mechanic, a dilettante, a big game hunter, a photojournalist, and a federal agent. And these were the same types of investigators that initially played it in my game. So I was like, yeah, we're just going to make it this group. Inside back page, here's the actual picture that I was able to commission, which I love that photo. I love that. It's just beautiful. That's by J.B. Lee. His DeviantArt is at Gomro. So Gomro if you want to check him out. Quote from H.P. Lovecraft, a little about the author section, and then back page with the blurbs, and of course, Miskatonic Repository. Sorry, this actually ended up being a little longer than last time. So, that's it. That is Nightmare in the Moonlight. If you have an interest in buying it, it is available at DriveThruRPG. I'll put a link in the description below. 90 pages. That's my biggest one so far. I'm hoping the next few are going to be a lot shorter. So, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, I appreciate it, and I will talk to y'all next time.